What brings you here? You can't come in. You're a stranger. My son and his wife, who had been living with us, decided to move out after building their new single-family home. Their house was finally finished, and today was the housewarming party. I decided to go and celebrate with my friends, but my son and his wife rejected me at the door, telling me something unbelievable. If you really want to come in, you have to pay a 1,300 pesos entrance fee. Their words were so outrageous I was dumbfounded. How could they call me a stranger when I'm their mother-in-law? We lived together until recently, and now to enter their housewarming party, they're asking me to pay such an exorbitant amount. While she smiled, I tried to digest what I just heard. A furious rage began to take hold of me. I seethed inside, thinking about how rude she had always been to me when we lived together. She looked at me with contempt, yelled at me, and treated me like a servant. She made me do all the housework and take care of the grandchildren, especially the grandchildren, with whom she constantly left me alone. My son, on the other hand, was completely on her side. I couldn't believe it. We used to be so close before his marriage. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to teach them a lesson. With a blank expression, I looked at them and said, "Okay, I'm going home." My son and his wife ignored me. They even laughed, feeling victorious. I turned my back and headed straight to a particular place. 3 days later, something changed. "Hey, what's going on?" was the first thing I heard when my son and his wife rushed into our house looking panicked. My name is Grace. Ever since my only son, Jack, got a job and moved out, I've been living with my husband in a spacious house. Although I say he's my son, there's no blood relation between us. He was born to my husband and his ex-wife, but regardless of not being blood relatives, I loved him as my own son. He also loved me as his true mother. Since my son became independent, I felt a little lonely, but I've also enjoyed the freedom. I stopped being a full-time mother and dedicated myself more to my work. My husband and I work at a family business run by his brother. A small business, but we both have positions there. Thanks to both of us working and maintaining our positions, I think we live a relatively comfortable life. We were leading a normal, happy life, but I never expected to face a situation like the one that presented itself. Life is unpredictable. 3 years after starting his job, my son married a woman who also works at the same company. She's a beautiful woman with a great figure, and anyone would say she's charming. When I saw them laughing with each other during the family gathering and at the wedding, I felt very peaceful. Some time after their marriage, I received the news that my daughter-in-law was pregnant. "Oh, congratulations. When is the baby due?" I asked excitedly. Thanks. The due date is still quite far off. Is everything all right? You sound very depressed, I said, happy about the news of my first grandchild. I congratulated her sincerely, but her voice sounded somber. I asked if there was any problem, and she started speaking in a faint voice. Actually, according to my son, his wife is very proud of her appearance. Since she got pregnant, she can't stand seeing how her belly grows and her figure changes. She's becoming fuller, and that has her increasingly hysterical every night. She gets on the scale, looks in the mirror, and screams. My son tries to comfort her, telling her that those changes are proof that the baby is growing well. "It's not like you've gained weight," he tells her, but it seems like none of that reassures her. My daughter-in-law started to see my son as a husband who doesn't understand her problems, and her irritation only grew. In the end, he couldn't bear her daily verbal abuse, and my son felt completely overwhelmed. "I can't handle this. Just please help me," he asked us, tearfully pleading that we let them move in with us. Honestly, I didn't think moving in with us would help my daughter-in-law. I told him we couldn't offer them much support because we were busy working during the day. However, hearing my son's plea and seeing that he might collapse if he continued living alone with her, I consulted with my husband, and we decided to let them move in with us. From the day my son and his wife moved into our house, my impression of my daughter-in-law worsened. The first thing she said upon arriving was a derogatory comment about our house. "What's with this house? It's so old and dirty, and it's cold too. Oh, how awful. I would have preferred a small apartment. Our house is American style and has been in the family since my husband's grandfather's time. It has a picturesque charm, but it's true that it's also old in many ways. There are gaps where the wind comes in. So while I couldn't deny her complaints, I found it incredibly rude that she complained so blatantly in front of us, the owners and her in-laws. But her bad behavior didn't stop there. "Hey mother-in-law, can you prepare dinner quickly and make sure to clean well? It's unacceptable for dust to accumulate in the house. What if something happens to the baby that's about to be born?" My daughter-in-law started treating me like a servant, throwing derogatory comments at me. Once I reprimanded her for her attitude, but she replied, "I'm pregnant. What if something happens to Gary because of my stress?" She refused to change her disrespectful behavior. Although I thought it was highly unlikely that something would actually happen to the baby just because of that, it's also true that pregnant women are delicate and can't be taken lightly. I hoped her attitude would improve after giving birth. I told myself that she was surely irritable because things weren't going her way during the pregnancy. Hormones must be affecting her. In my mind, I decided to silently endure her tyranny, although it was very difficult for me. A few months after my son and his wife moved in with us, my daughter-in-law gave birth to a healthy baby. My husband and I were very happy about the birth of our long-awaited first grandchild. My daughter-in-law, who is normally noisy, was quiet for a while after giving birth, which allowed us to enjoy a brief period of peace. However, about a month after my grandson's birth, our home became even more miserable than before. Shortly after his birth, my husband died in a traffic accident. Stunned by the sudden loss of my husband, I managed to arrange his funeral. Upon returning home after the ceremony, I found my daughter-in-law sitting on the sofa where my husband used to sit. She hadn't attended the funeral, saying she was exhausted from postpartum. When she noticed I had returned, she hurled insults at me. Now that he's not here, even if he was hardly ever home because of work, the house feels much more spacious. It's like a breath of fresh air. I couldn't believe the words she just said so brazenly. I doubted my ears, but she continued denigrating my late husband, clearly disrespecting him. Although my husband was a workaholic, I respected and loved him for his dedication. It was infuriating to hear my daughter-in-law ridicule someone she barely knew and complained about every day. Just when I was about to argue, my son said something that left me stunned. "It's true, Mom. He was never home, but he was always nagging." That was annoying. Not only did he not defend his father, but he joined his wife in mocking him. I had hoped he would scold her. From that moment on, my son's behavior changed drastically. He always remained silent while his wife disrespected and mistreated me. He never called her out, even though he knew she was wrong. After my husband's death, he started to completely agree with her. He even began to reprimand and give me orders. My son, who had never been rebellious, and with whom I had had a good relationship since his childhood, now acted terribly. I thought that perhaps his behavior was a result of his wife's influence, but it seemed like I was the only one who felt he had changed. One day, my daughter-in-law confronted me directly. "I know you're not Jack's real mother, right? I heard he never really saw you as a mother. Also, you act like you are and you're always bothering him. He said he only put up with you because of his dad, but he actually wanted to leave home." Her words made me feel like the ground had crumbled beneath my feet. I couldn't believe my son thought of me that way. Smiling, she said, "That's why I have no reason to respect you either," and left. I stood there dumbfounded, watching her walk away. My son and his wife's behavior got worse. Not only did they hurl insults at me, but they also left their son with me and went out to play. They completely ignored my situation and went out day and night, saying they were going out with friends, shopping, or even drinking. Sometimes they were gone for 2 days on weekends. What were they thinking, leaving their infant baby with me and taking off as if it were nothing? Every time they left the baby with me, I protested, but they wouldn't listen. On the contrary, they would tell me, "You should feel privileged to spend time with your adorable grandson." The worst part was that they left the crying baby with me at night. "Hey, I was sleeping well and you woke me up. Make him stop crying quickly. I can't stand my sleep being interrupted every night. Make sure you take good care of him so he doesn't cry." I explained that it's normal for a baby to cry at night no matter how much I care for him during the day, but they just ignored me and dumped all the responsibility on me, as if they had no awareness of what it means to be parents. Although I felt justified anger if I refused to take care of the baby, they made me feel like I was the bad guy. To take care of my grandson, who would probably be neglected if I didn't, I had no choice but to take care of him as they asked. As time passed, the years also passed. My grandson grew up healthy and started being less demanding. He was truly adorable. Even so, my son and his wife kept leaving their grandson with me while they continued with their lifestyle, going out all the time. One day, when those kinds of days had already become normal, my daughter-in-law suddenly started being irrational. I've had enough. This old, dilapidated house is driving me crazy. Since we moved in together, she had complained about our house, but this time she seemed more determined. Maybe she couldn't stand the house anymore, or maybe because they didn't need to leave the child with me as much. Suddenly, she began to insist that she wanted to move to a new and beautiful house. To my surprise, my son joined in her complaint. The truth is, I've also endured living in this old house for a long time. They both began to express their desire to move. Although they complained, I really thought they wouldn't do it. I tried to ignore their comments and go on with my life. However, a few months later, my son and his wife made it a reality. They bought land in an exclusive area downtown and started building a new house. Finally, we can say goodbye to this ugly old house, they said happily. Although I had my own thoughts about it, I sighed in relief, thinking I would finally be free of them. The day their new house was finished, I decided to visit them to see the house and celebrate with them. When I arrived, I found there were many people in the house, including my daughter-in-law's friends and her parents. Surrounded by so many guests, my son and his wife proudly showed off their new house. They seemed busy, so after taking a quick tour of the house, I decided to leave. As I approached them to say goodbye, I noticed how their attitude changed. They showed their displeasure and rejected me immediately. "What are you doing here?" my daughter-in-law said. "You can't come in. You're a stranger." Stunned by those words, I was speechless. Then, as if she had a wonderful idea, she smiled and said, "Well, if you really want to come in, you'll have to pay a 1,300 pesos entrance fee." That absurd request left me completely surprised. They called me a stranger when I'm their mother-in-law, and until recently, we had lived together. Now they were asking me to pay to enter their housewarming party, and to top it off such an exaggerated amount. While she kept smiling, I tried to process what I had just heard. A fury began to invade me as I remembered how she had always been incredibly rude to me, even when we lived together. She looked at me with contempt, insulted me, and treated me like her servant. She made me do all the housework and take care of my grandchildren. Many times she left them with me to go out, not caring about my time or rest. My son, on the other hand, was always on her side, and that hurt me a lot. It was hard to believe that before their marriage, we were a close-knit family. It could be true that he didn't see me as his real mother, but I had raised him with all the love possible, as if he were my own son. However, after my husband's death, my son stopped pretending and started treating me with superficiality. They didn't feel even a bit of gratitude for how I raised them. I felt as if my kindness had been repaid with betrayal. Anger invaded me. I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided I was going to get revenge. With a blank expression, I looked at them and said, "Okay, then I'm going home." They replied, "Oh, you come all the way here and don't come in? Well, okay. Don't ever come back." They laughed loudly as they kicked me out of their new home. Turning my back, I returned to my house, and then I went straight to the bank. 3 days later, my son and his wife arrived running to our house with long faces, barging in as if they were going to knock the door down. I attended to them outside the entrance and didn't let them in. "Please stop shouting like that. You're disturbing the neighbors. Be quiet. The real problem here is why our bank account is empty." I scolded them, not trying to hide my anger. But my daughter-in-law abruptly replied as if my attitude didn't matter. "The bank account is empty." I knew exactly what was going on. Suppressing my anger, I replied, "Oh, the bank account? I transferred all the money to another bank. From now on, you'll have to pay for all your expenses. Mortgage, clothes, drinks." Hearing my answer, my son and his wife were speechless. In fact, since they started living with us, they used my bank account for everything. Not only for living expenses and raising children, but also for clothes, luxury brands, and even the down payment and purchase of the land for their new house. Everything had come out of my account. Looking back, I wish I hadn't done it. I spoiled them a lot, but ever since I remarried my husband, I always felt sympathy for them. My son lost his biological mother when he was young, And right after his own son was born, he lost his father. Although we had no blood connection, I wanted to support him as a mother. In fact, I thought I had to do it, despite them insulting and treating me terribly. I endured it and tried to do everything I could for him, thinking that was my way of showing him love. However, with this new incident at the house, I finally ran out of patience. If my son had become such a foolish person, then I was done. Perhaps my husband had anticipated something like this would happen sooner or later. Before he passed away, he told me that if something happened to me, he would cut ties with my son and his wife. When I first heard those words, I had no ill feelings towards my son or his wife, so I was surprised and asked him why he said that. Then my husband explained that he felt my son wasn't making good decisions in life, and that the wife he chose was also a problematic person. He talked about specific episodes, but at the time I couldn't believe they would act that way and doubted my husband's intuition. The strong tone he used, unusually firm for him, was something I'll never forget. Since he passed away, those words have been engraved in the back of my mind. Every time my son and his wife treated me horribly, I prayed and talked to my husband's portrait. This time too, after telling myself it was time to let go of my son, I went to the bank. Maybe because they had cut off the bank account that they freely used up until that moment, it seemed to me that it was already too much for them. While my son and his wife were there, they confronted me. "Is that all you wanted to say?" they asked. "If it is, please leave." But when I tried to enter the house, my son tried to stop me, grabbing the door. I hit his hand and told them, "I'm sorry, but this house is off-limits to strangers. I'd consider it if you pay a 1,300 pesos entrance fee." Using the same words his wife had said to me before. They were astonished. They seemed indignant. But in the end, they left without saying a word. I thought I was finally free of problems, but it wasn't that simple. The next day, my son and his wife came to visit our house again. "Good morning, Mom. Sorry about yesterday. It seems we both got a little nervous. Are you angry? Oh, you look tired, Mom. Can I give you a shoulder massage?" Their tone had completely changed since yesterday. He was trying to see how I felt. His wife, who had never called me mother-in-law before, now used that term while making sly gestures, clearly trying to win my favor. Instead of truly apologizing for what they had done, they superficially tried to please me to improve their situation. But that meant nothing unless they were superficial. They probably didn't think I was serious about disowning them. I was so disgusted that I couldn't say anything, but their excessively friendly attitude was so annoying that I rejected them bluntly. "It doesn't matter how much you try to flatter me now, I won't. I won't give you a single penny more. Please leave." Realizing that their flattery wasn't working, they dropped their fake smiles and started shouting angrily, "Who do you think you are? You act like you're superior and powerful after we showed you respect. Don't get sassy with us, you foolish old woman. Just give us the money." Their true nature came to light, and they began to hurl unbearable insults at me. Their behavior had no decency. It was horrible. While I was thinking of asking for help because they were becoming a real nuisance to the neighborhood, my daughter-in-law shouted, "Don't ignore me," and threw a potted plant on the floor, shattering it. Infuriated by their words and attitude, my son shouted, "You old hag! Do you really think you can live comfortably after what you did? I'll sue you for elder abuse. I am your son, so I'm going to inherit everything anyway. You won't be able to live for much longer. Just hand over your assets to me. Otherwise." Because of their words and attitude, my son believed he would inherit everything. When I understood what he had said, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. They seemed completely mistaken. "What are you talking about? I have no right to inheritance. Don't make things up." They refused to believe me, but when I explained the truth, their faces turned pale. The truth is, I never legally adopted my son. Legally, he's only my husband's stepson, and he has no right to my estate. For my son to have inheritance rights, I would have to adopt him or write a will. And of course, I have no intention of making a will. The only option left would be adoption, but I already filed a statement of non-acceptance to prevent it. In other words, unless I change my mind, there's no way my son can inherit my estate. So even if I die, I won't give him anything. If you understand this, please leave quickly. But, fully confident that he would inherit my estate, hearing this was a big shock to them. They were speechless and surprised. Even though I insisted they leave, my son and his wife wouldn't. Exasperated, I took my phone and called. Hello, it's the police. Actually, a potted plant in my house was broken. Yes, the culprits are still here in front of me. Could you come and arrest them quickly? I called the nearest police station, reporting the damage to the potted plant by my daughter-in-law as property damage. Realizing they had been reported, they trembled and ran out of my house before the police arrived. Seeing them flee so quickly, I finally felt that the problems that had plagued me for years were being resolved, and I sighed in relief. Later, although the potted plant was broken, I decided not to press charges since there were no injuries, and I just wanted my son and his wife to get away from my house. Considering the plant wasn't that expensive, I decided it was best to let things go without making a big fuss. After a while, I heard through the grapevine that my son and his wife continued with their extravagant lifestyle, which almost ruined them. They thought there was still money in my son's account, but my daughter-in-law didn't stop spending and used his credit cards. She miscalculated as there wasn't much savings left in my son's account. As a result, my son couldn't keep up with the mortgage on his new house or his wife's expenses and began to accumulate debts. The debts became so large that, in his desperation, my son even embezzled money from his company. He was quickly caught and fired from his job. Now drowning in debt and unemployed, my daughter-in-law demanded a divorce, implying she no longer needed him. However, my son refused to accept it, and the fight ultimately led to a lawsuit. Surprisingly, during the legal battle, it was revealed that the grandson wasn't my son's child. In other words, my daughter-in-law cheated on my son. This added even more financial woes to the situation, making the divorce even more complicated. They're still caught in a nasty legal dispute, hurling insults at each other. As for me, I have freed myself from all the problems with my son's family, which had been a headache for years, and I have been able to focus more on my work. As a result, our company's sales have multiplied, and both the staff and my own reputation have improved. There are no more promotions or salary increases, but I'm not that interested in that anyway. Instead, I want to work harder for the employees who admire me. Now, alone in the spacious house I shared with my late husband, I continue living here. Every day, I talk to my husband in the portrait and spend my days in peace.